Okay, so this is just essentially a quick overview of how to read and interpret and the basic information of this. This worksheet is essentially a guided introduction to pedigrees. It contains all of the information you need in order to solve pedigrees and interpret these questions. I'm just going to sort of walk you through how to use it and review it. So what pedigrees are is they're essentially visual charts that are going to depict a family history. They're essentially the genetic version of a family tree, and they show relationships between individuals. But specifically what you're doing in a pedigree is you're tracking a genetic trait. When I say a genetic trait, you're never going to do a pedigree to see who's good at playing guitar or who's good at chess or something that has no genetic relationship. You take a trait that's passed down from parent to offspring, and you follow it through a family to look at the mode of inheritance, specifically whether it's a dominant trait, meaning that if that gene is found on either of the chromosomes, it expresses itself, whether it's a recessive trait, meaning you have to have two copies of that gene in order for it to express itself in your phenotype, or whether it's X-linked, so whether it's found on the X chromosome. I'm going to walk you through what you look for in these pedigrees to identify the different patterns. Now, what these pedigrees are actually used for is they're tools where a genetic counselor, which is a job that is growing in frequency, so that's a person that has their master's in genetics, but they also have a master's in social work, and they're people that'll sit down with a couple where a genetic disease might run in their family. So let's say they have hemophilia, red-green color blindness, Tay-Sachs, something that has a genetic component to it. They know members of their family have it, and they want to know before they have children, what are the possibility they're going to pass it on to their offspring. What a genetic counselor does is they'll talk to the couple and they'll make a pedigree. They'll figure out, knowing the mode of inheritance or determining the mode of inheritance, what are the chances that this couple will have an offspring with the condition. And then they can make some reproductive decisions. So that's where it's used today. So these are still used today. So the symbology, one of the things is that individuals are going to be represented by shapes. Males are always squares, females are circles. This is a binary system, meaning if you look at your chart right here, you'll notice that an empty circle means that this is an individual who is not affected by the trait. An individual with a colored in circle or square is an individual that does have the trait. Now, being colored in does not tell you dominance, recessive, or X-linked. It just means this person has it. Being not colored in means you don't have it. If there's a horizontal line connecting a square and a circle, that means there's a mating. So this is people that are married if we're talking about humans. And if you look right here in the center, this is what a family would look like. So you notice you have a horizontal line connecting the male and the female, a vertical line, and then another horizontal line. Any circles or squares that come off of that second horizontal line connected by the vertical line are their children. So right here we have a son and a daughter, and here's their mother and their father. To show twins, you just have a single point of attachment coming off, and you show both children coming off of that single point of attachment to represent it's one birth with two offspring. Right here we have double lines. What double lines represent, it says consanguine marriage. What this is it's incest. So it's people that are related to one another having children. Now the reason that this is in here, and it's actually fairly common in pedigrees, is because besides all of the social, emotional, psychological bad things about incest, there's a biological component to it as well. If a recessive condition runs in a family and you breed with another person that is in your family, the chances of both of you being carriers for that recessive condition and passing it on to your offspring increases drastically, as opposed to if you were just going to mate with and have offspring a random person in the population, because a random person's chances of being a carrier is much less than a person that you're related to. So that's why we see a lot of these in pedigrees. The last two things I want to point out is one, you'll notice this heterozygous or carriers for, where it shows half colored in. This is an optional step. Not all pedigrees you're going to find will show you this, but if you see it, that's what it means. The last thing I want to point out to you guys is there are times where you're going to know an individual has the dominant allele. So they have at least one, but they don't have children or their parents aren't given to you. So you can't figure out what the second copy of the allele is. The way that we would show this, and I do want you to make a little note here, there's a blank space right there, is you just do the dominant allele. So you would do one capital letter to represent, I know they have one dominant allele. And then for your second allele, just do a question mark. And that represents, I know one's dominant, but I can't say for certain what the second copy or what their second allele is. All right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to take you through the basic components of what this worksheet is. You'll notice there are 3 sections labeled A, B, and last but not least, C. What each section is it is a, let me fix this one right there. What each section is it's a walkthrough of the different types of patterns of inheritance. So A is going to take you through dominant traits. It says autosomal dominant. Autosomal just means it's on chromosome 1 through 22. So the chromosomes that do not matter if you are a boy or girl, everybody's got them. So we're talking about traits that do not depend on your biological sex. What you'll find in each section, so here's dominant in A, B is recessive, and C is sex-linked. So the first thing I've given you is I give you rules. These are rules for if you're looking at a pedigree, and again at the beginning I'm telling you right here in A, this is a pedigree of a dominant trait. These are the rules where if I don't tell you, so if I just give you a random pedigree and I say, hey, tell me if it's dominant, recessive, or sex-linked, look for these rules. So if you see the trait in every generation, if you see that every offspring has at least one parent with it, both males and females equally affected, and unaffected parents don't have offspring with the trait. If you go down the list and it's true of the pedigree, those are signs that it's a dominant trait. The next thing you're going to have to be able to do is you're going to have to be able to fill in genotypes. Read this important information here. It tells you how to determine with dominant, recessive, and sex-linked what people's genotypes are. And the last thing is I give you a pedigree and I give you some questions to answer about it to help you practice interpreting dominant ones. You have to kind of segment your brain here in a second. So when you're working on A, remember that colored in here means dominant. But when you get to B, you have to remember that I'm telling you this is a recessive trait. So colored in doesn't mean dominant anymore. It means recessive. So the structure is going to stay the same. Instructions here, how to figure out genotypes, pedigree, practice problems. But you have to consider what section you're in. At the very end, once you've gone through A, B, and C, there are practice problems where you're going to apply your knowledge of pedigrees to answer. If you have any questions, you can email me, ask each other. We're going to work on this today in class. We'll go over it next time we meet.